coming in a little late, I guess, to the event, considering this is being held in Melbourne, Australia. This is the second Asia Pacific Othello Championship 2024, and basically, this event is a regional championship event that provides the champion an additional seat to his country to enter the year-end World Othello Championship. So I believe it's also being held in the Americas and also in Europe to provide that extra seat for that national team who wins. And obviously, the majority of the fields coming from Japan, China, Singapore, Australia, the host country, definitely, and also Mongolia seems to be quite active in playing as well. So you can see these countries have signed up, and there are some 40 players playing. So this is currently at round five. I see that we can probably have some games to go through. So over here on the left, you have flipthedisc.com, which is where the event is being hosted. I think this is a fairly new website, but it's an extremely well done up website, which features all the live events more recently. So yeah, over here you'll be able to navigate settings, players, rounds, and standings. If we look quickly at the standings right now, basically the field is dominated by the Japanese, right? Kurita Seiya being a former top 2 or 3 players within the World Othello Championship. Shiki Shimomura, he hasn't represented Japan at the World Othello Championships before, but everyone knows that he's extremely strong as well at a 7-dan or World Championship top 4 level. And Kento Urano also headlining this. He's the 2022 World Champion, and Tetsu Satani as well. I think he got third in 2019, and then I think he's done well for more recent tournaments as well. So these top 4, not a surprise to see them there. Murakami Takeshi being a 3-time world champion is also there. And you also have the top Australian players, and Scott, Joanna, and Matt as well. And you have some of the Singapore players and Japanese players basically forming out the middle of the field. And yeah, so this is how it stands right now. And on the right, you have liveothello.com. So if you just go to www.liveothello.com, you'll be able to view the games in real time. So right now there are some games going on, but maybe I could go to some of the older games just to kind of quickly run through what we've seen so far at the tournament. So let me just look at round 1 in the rounds. So you have the pairings for round 1. So let me just quickly look at round 1. So I think over here you can see probably Matt being one of the top Australian players together with Scott. You can see there are some interesting games that happen between the Japanese and the Australians. So maybe we could take a look at one of the games from Matt against Murakami Takeshi. So it does take some time to load. Maybe my internet is slow, but let's see how that works. Okay. So typically what I'll do is just reset the board and just quickly run through the match. So basically White played diagonal opening and Matt just played the standard cow. And then this variation, I think I see it ever so often with Ben Celia as well. So the top American player is double world champion. He plays this as well. And basically Matt is trying to form his disc in the center, which is the general guideline that we tend to say, you know, when you play Othello, you want to preserve mobility as much as possible. So basically that's what both players are trying to do. So I think no surprise, not much of a surprise move in the first couple of moves. Both players are just trying to kind of retain the access into the center. If you look at the moves that they've traded off, basically what they're trying to do is to maintain their disc in the center. So yeah, I think this is quite an interesting game. So over here, I would actually say that maybe Black might even be in a better position. So it'll be interesting to see how Murakami actually pulled off the win over here. So yeah, I think over here I pretty much feel that Black is in a better position. So usually what we say is maybe if you're trying to look for quiet moves to retain mobility, you tend to want to play against what your opponent has just played. So Black has just played f8 over here, flips e7. So you can see this continuous diagonal roll from f8 up down to b4. This basically the tail end of it would probably give a potential good move. So that's why White moved to a3 perhaps. That's one of the moves that allow you to just flip, one disc, which is probably the fewest discs you can flip in each move, and then it's only in one direction against the tail end of what your opponent just played. So that's quite a standard kind of way to respond and try to retain more moves as much as possible to the left, because black simply cannot access this, and these moves a4 and a5 would still be kind of open for white to play. So even at this point, I do feel that black still has the slight edge, but maybe over here because white has taken away the access, because black took e1 without going for e8 feed off to the unbalanced edge first, while he still could. So maybe that took away his access to e8. So white plays a5, removing the excess, and of course if black goes into a4 and white takes a7, black again loses this excess, which the purpose of playing f8 in the first place was basically to try to get two consecutive moves here, but by choosing to ignore that and play e1 instead of taking it while you still can, maybe Matt kind of gave away one tempo. And in Othello, if you give away one or two tempos, that's probably bad enough to lose the game. So by playing one move away from where you might have, needed to play, and you give away the control to your opponent, then maybe it's tough to regain that access back to e8 again. So yeah, over here, Murakami has kind of capitalized on that exchange. So I think probably e1 might have been the mistake by Matt for not kind of jumping into e8 and giving white the disadvantage shape while he still could. But just looking at this situation here, yeah, I guess it makes it difficult because white also controls this mini diagonal. So typically, black would want to kind of balance out on g1, but unfortunately, in this case, he doesn't have access. And also, there's a very strong diagonal control over here, and there are no black discs over here. So I think next, black, yeah, was kind of forced to play a bad move over here. So I think probably Matt didn't realize that e1 could have caused such a drastic change as well. So maybe, yeah, and this is round one, so I guess sometimes nerves or just slight mistakes tend to get the better of most of us as well. So okay, so basically black tried to retain the main diagonal as much as possible, but I think over here white has a very strong access to kind of feed off. So the reason why white has played g7 is to kind of retain g8 as an option, and also let me just select put. So when you select put, you basically have the option to kind of play around with the board on the website. So if you were to play g7, if black took the corner, you can feed off this as white. Even if black takes the edge, white goes in, black is forced to kind of give up this. And basically, white would be able to win quite simply this way. So if we kind of simulate the other moves, if black wouldn't take g8 to give up the corner, so naturally maybe the other choice for black would be b8. And if black plays b8, then white plays h7, black h8, white, and again you can see it's kind of a pure dominance by white to kind of complete the game. So I think over here it's more of a how Murakami Takeshi actually chose to kind of complete the game and kind of shut it down. If white chose to play this one, then black might have played this, and then white would be slightly more in trouble because there's no way to kind of control the diagonal since black has that control, and white would then be forced to kind of play out. Of course, there is a kind of a cheat sheet that you can use. So if you click on the AI button once it's available in the later part of the game, what it does is basically uses the software to analyze the game and give you the reading on that. So if we just go back to that position that I covered earlier, you can click on AI and you can see, as opposed to this move, if you played this, it would be a -32. This is a +16. So of course, this shows +8, so that could have been an option for white as well. But yeah, usually seasoned players, it's quite clear cut that there's no need for you to take any risk considering that you're up one tempo. So maybe white, and then maybe black would have went here perhaps for one possible move to kind of struggle. But again, white could just simply defend the corner, and it'll be fairly straightforward for white to close out the game. So let me just kind of retrace back to that position. So if I just retrace back to just this move, on the 41st move, you can see the AI button has popped up. But before that, on the 40th move, you realize the AI button is not available because I think probably due to the software reading constraints as well. So I think the last kind of 24 moves, it's the restrictions, and in general, it's actually useful to have. So let's let's probably pop over to Scott's game with Tanida. Again, top Australian playing one of the top Japanese. I think Kunihiko Tanida was one of the youngest. He was the youngest world Othello champion before one of the young players at 11 years of age, Keisuke Fukuchi, actually broke his record. I think he probably won it when he was 15 or 17, and then Keisuke won it at 11 years old, I think in the year 2018. So yeah, Tanida has always been around, and I think I was lucky enough to kind of meet him in person at my very first World Othello Championship in 2011. That was in Newark. So the Hilton Hotel, I think. Yeah. So this is basically Tanida plays. So one of the openings is actually named after Tanida, and it's actually comes out of the diagonal opening. So yeah, I guess it's not a surprise to kind of see him play diagonal and Scott play the cow. So it goes almost like a. I think this is Rose v Toth opening, if I'm not wrong. So basically it's instead of going to the typical sailboat opening, you go to this diagonal cut over here, and then I think I see this being played between a former world champion as well. I think the Thai Othello champion Truly played this against, I believe, a Swedish player at the World Othello Championship. So this is also quite a common line to play if you're up against each other in this opening. So I think no surprises in terms of the book, but the general concept still stands the same. Basically, at the opening, you want to kind of flip as few discs as possible, remain into the center, try to retain key control of such mini diagonals. So for example, the reason why black plays e1 over here is to control the mini diagonal between e3 and f4 over here. So white would need to kind of find a way to kind of access this mini diagonal so that it can cut back. But a direct kind of approach towards this would be to try to flip f4. But the moves that flip f4 will probably cost too much to play. Like for example, f6 might give you f4, but at the same time, c7 could also give you f4. But these two moves are extremely loud and it doesn't make sense. So sometimes when you want to access a certain disc and try to maintain the center, what you have to do is to kind of wait. So c6 is kind of like a waiting move for white over here. So thereafter black jumps into the center. I think for more seasoned players who knows the book opening, this is quite a standard sequence to play out. So yeah, learn your openings if you want to kind of compete with the best. So over here again, this is something similar to what I've mentioned before. White takes a kind of edge move, flips a couple of this, maintains this long continuous diagonal, and then at the tail end of it, for a quiet move, this is one way to kind of spot a quiet move immediately or instinctively. So black goes here, even though it's probably somewhat still in the book. So again, over here, white flips this into the center. So the reason why this flips, for this in three different directions is fine because it's still roughly in the center of the center 16, and it doesn't really create too many more moves for black as well. So by playing this, black basically just has f6 and maybe g6 generated. So over here, again, I think Scott thinks that there's no rush to kind of go to g6 or f6. So obviously, kind of the tail end of this mini diagonal between e6 to c4 seems like the logical choice. So over here, white doesn't jump into this immediately, probably doesn't want to give away a quiet move too easily. So decides to kind of just play out a more passive waiting move and just to wait for maybe some moves by black. So black continues to kind of retain. So as you continue to kind of play Othello, you would realize, you're either centralizing or you're either keeping to your side of the board to kind of draw your opponent over so that you can kind of force him into maybe the x squares or c squares to give you the corner at your side of the board, ideally. And then from there, you can kind of just broaden your influence across the rest of the board and just win it. So white takes g5. White takes g5. Okay, I think that's fine in general. I don't really see major problems with this exchange of the mid-game. But so over here, white feeds the edge, and then decides to construct it over here. Okay, and then jump in, feed off the edge. I don't really see major errors by both players, I guess. Of course, I'm not like a world champion level player, but at the same time, just giving my own assessment to this board. So typically, I don't think G6 is it's not often a great move. Most of the time in this shape, what you want to play is to play H5 or maybe H4 if you have the access to. But given that white is somewhat running out of moves, I think white probably thought that this would be the better move to play. So even at this stage, I don't think it's a major losing position for white. But black is actually very skillfully defending this with a 2 double unbalanced edge, kind of leading to this corner and defending out of it. So if white chooses to play a7 one day, black does have the option to kind of either play f1, force white to take the corner, and black can take a6 to wedge in between and capture a8 corner as a trade-off, or the opposite, where black plays a6 and feeds off a1 corner and goes into f1 and captures h1 corner. So over here, black and white into the center. So white is basically trying to control this diagonal as much as possible. Probably the reason why he did this is to kind of establish more poison and connect this 3 black discs that are not changed to the right hand zone, just to try to make these moves a bit more poison. So black jumps in. So I think, yeah, typically at the end stage, you would realize you don't really have as many options as you had in the early game. And usually you try as much as possible to kind of control the key diagonals, such as a2 throughout to f7, and typically that would probably give you a better shape or a better fighting opportunity. Okay, so I guess this move, like I said earlier, when white commits to a7, then black does have the option to, it's a double unbalanced edge. At the same time, it's almost like a double wedge. So black can choose to play a6. So you have 2 options here, right? Black, white, black, white, black. But as you can see, giving white a strong edge over here doesn't really help black too much. And black would probably have to play a few moves just to kind of sweep back some of this along this column. So let me just go back. And at the same time, playing f1 does allow black to control this main diagonal, which is between f3 to c6. That prevents a lot of issues in the endgame for black. And it does give black an opportunity to kind of do something called a renda by the Japanese, which is basically a swindle. And you want to kind of jump into b7 over here while you have the momentary diagonal control over here, so that you can basically play 2 consecutive moves knowing that you have an unblocked access to the corner of a8. So even if white does cut in to try to chase after the corner, he's still kind of 1 move slow over here. So if white plays here, black can still kind of wrap up the game and gain the moves here. So yeah, I think it's probably the main turning point here. Offhand, the game did look a bit even, but because of that change in tempo, perhaps that might have affected the outcome of the game. So I'm just trying to look for possibilities for white. Like maybe could white have played a6, a7, and then followed by g8, perhaps? So maybe this could have been an alternate option, I guess, as opposed to playing just a7 and getting the disc cut on the main diagonal. Not too sure. Maybe the AI would be able to tell us at this position. So yeah, probably that. Yeah. So I think Kunihiko Tanida played minus 18 over here. So yeah, I think it's hard to kind of tell sometimes without the program ratings. Excuse me. You're reading off the position on the board, so it's hard to tell the difference until your opponent plays a stunning move like to control the diagonal, and then you realize that hey, this actually causes you to lose a lot more tempo. Okay, so yeah, I think that was quite a good game played by Scott. So maybe let's just play out the remaining sequence. So that's basically what happened, I guess. And yeah, basically white ran out of moves. Okay. So I think a couple of more games might have been out. Let's take a look at the latest results. So Kurita Seiya has just won round 5 against Urano Kento. So I think these two, including Satani and Shiki, might be the 4 top runners for the title. I think for Japan, the 5-time world champion Mr. Takanashi Yusuke has already qualified through the Meijin tournament earlier in the year to the World Othello Championship. So yeah, very happy for him because he's a close personal friend and somebody who's very positive at every time and friendly. So I think Kurita, in my opinion, might be the front runner. I think he was third place last year despite winning all 13 Swiss pairing rounds, but he unfortunately fell short in the semifinals against the eventual champion Mr. Yasushi Nagano from Japan. He goes by the nickname Umigame underscore P on Othello Quest, in case you haven't realized or you aren't aware of it. He's, I think, maybe usually playing at 2400 to 2500 rating on the 5M. And I think more recently, the 1M seems to be a bit more challenging in terms of the environment, and he plays probably more around between 2200 to 2300 there. Okay, so let's take a look at the standings after round 5. So okay, so the standings in round 5 haven't been published, probably because they're still waiting for some results, I guess. Or just waiting for it to load. Okay, so interesting. Um, so I think Satani and Shiki Shimomura are pretty similar in their style. I think Urano Kento, Shiki Shimomura, and Satani almost plays like a perfect like book. So yeah, I think earlier Satani already had a draw game with Mr. Urano. So I think maybe both of them didn't want to kind of take too much risks against each other, knowing their book powers. I think Shiki Shimomura does play some unique lines. He's Pupon on Othello Quest, in case you don't know, Pulpon, Pupon. So yeah, he's six. I think he's a very young player as well, and I think most of the top Japanese players right now are very young, probably in their 20s. Yeah, and you can see a lot of the youngsters between kind of maybe 10 to 20 actually aspiring to kind of beat them as well. Yeah, so yeah, I mean it's not surprising to see the Japanese at the top. So Keita Omori, I'm familiar because I think I've seen him in some of the Japanese games. He's also done some commentary on some of the live games. Ogura Ryutaro, I don't really have as much background as I should with him, and Harada Shota as well, so forgive me. But yeah, interesting to see Scott has a draw game with him, and Nanase Yuma, again, I don't really have a lot of background for him, but Joanna Williams, she's, I think, maybe like a 3-time top women's world champion, so she's won the World Othello Championship top female, and I think Othello World Cup, and also even the Meijin. I think she was the first foreigner uh, who won like a major title in Japan, at least for the women's category. So over here, okay, so you see a Chinese player basically beating Murakami Takeshi. So considering the World Othello Championship is being held in Hangzhou, China, end of this year, I think China is actually up and coming together with Mongolia, basically building a very strong and big player base. Lots of youngsters are picking up the game in these two countries, and basically, trying to go for the World Othello Championship. So Leong Chikit, so he's from Singapore, so obviously I know him, and he's one of the top few players in Singapore. He's done well this year to kind of win two SG Open titles, and then more recently at the national championship, he didn't fare as well, I guess, but he still maintains his level of play. He's quite a stable player, and over here, Anthony edged out Matt, and Daniel won against Rihanna. So yeah, good to see kind of Singapore collect a few wins. Maybe we can look at the standings later. So let me just look at a few more games of interest. So I will tend to kind of skip games between maybe more seasoned players against players who might be more new, and games that are not as close. You tend not to be able to see as many moves on one side that potentially makes sense perhaps. So let's look at a game maybe between Daniel and Matt. Let's see. Daniel is a Singapore player. Let's see, he plays. Okay, so for this game, I think he plays quite a book Stephenson to Commoth. Matt replied with Commoth opening basically. So over here, if you select to play f3, that's Commoth, and if you select to play g5, that's no Kong. And basically, let's see, it's one of the kind of, I think this should be a draw book opening. It's almost like a standard sequence. So I think both players are not giving up too much advantage up to this point. So I think this game was probably quite a fairly even game on both sides, considering that it ended 33-31 and they're in a fairly book opening. I don't expect major big swings within in game. But at this point, it does look like so black chose a diagonal cut, probably to maintain into the center, just to cut out. At the same time, probably momentarily preventing white from feeding a6 corner to a8 and giving the wedge in between to capture the corner. So that's a trade-off. So yeah, so black, white, black is just a expansion in the mid game to the top zone. And of course, ultimately, you know that white is gonna jump in. So over here, white doesn't really have much of an option. It's either you take c1 or you feed a6. So yeah, so not much of a difference. A6 feed the corner and then capture c1, and then black takes out over here, and white jumps into the wedge as said before, and then followed by black, white, black, and then an exchange of corner. So over here, in fact, the game I think might be slightly even. At the same time, for black, what you want to do is to try to kind of so over here in this position, you tend to kind of prefer white's position, perhaps, considering that the playing field is closer to its active corner, because black's corner seems to be already settled with kind of 6 stable discs over here, while white still has a certain level of influence based on this corner and this edge to the right-hand side of the board, and it looks like the action is going to go, more towards like a anti-clockwise direction instead of clockwise. So sometimes it's important in the end game to kind of note where your position, where your position is. So for black, you're on the left-hand side corner, and the right is the white color corner. So with the gameplay still having some black discs on the right side, you tend to think that you would slightly prefer white's position. But at the same time, for black, what you can do is to try to exhaust white's moves, try to make white close off this zone, so that once white kind of closes off all the moves that he has here, he's kind of forced to play to the top left and then feed off the corner, so you can kind of expand your territory. So with that logic in mind, you want to basically try to play as much as possible. It's less intuitive to think that way, but in fact, you want to play as much to the right as possible, hoping that, try to make white wrap up the moves here, so that as early as possible, you want white to kind of go to the left-hand side and play towards, allow black to kind of extend its influence to the top of the board. So yeah, the more influence you have on the board in the end game, the better. At the opening and the mid game, you tend to want to retain the mobility until the key positions are picked up. So over here, black basically exchange the key position of a8 with h8 for white, or it's kind of forced to exchange anyway. So black played to the right hand side, which is correct, and continued to play black on the right hand side, just to kind of aim to exhaust white's moves as much as possible. So you can see white playing on the right and basically trying to trying to sweep as many discs as possible, while black is trying to make him end his moves as fast as possible. So over here, black actually played the correct sequence to kind of maintain this shape such that he doesn't create more moves to the top right hand side for white. So white, black, white, black. So black goes in. I think maybe to most beginner players or novice players, you tend to think that, hey, why should I give h5 so that white takes another h? So the idea here is basically to exhaust white's moves, because if black plays elsewhere, white takes one move here on h5, and then if black plays one more move elsewhere, white takes h2, and again, those two moves that you've taken at f2 and f1 basically creates even more moves for white. So white would then be able to continue to kind of consume moves to the top right, which we earlier mentioned about how white's corner into the bottom right actually gives more influence if the game were to progress a lot more on the anti-clockwise direction instead of the clockwise, given that black actually has the corners on the left-hand side. So as much as possible, black wants to kind of end that advancement in the anti-clockwise manner and go to the clockwise manner. So over here, black jumps into h5, and that's the correct way to kind of exhaust white's moves as much as possible. So after this exchange, you can kind of say that black has exhausted white's moves to the right, or basically tried to play in the most efficient way to kind of minimize the discs that are being lost to white on the right hand side as a result of this exchange earlier on for white to kind of feed off the corner. So in exchange of 6 stable discs, white kind of netted these 7 discs and maybe another 6 more discs over here that are stable. So now black then chooses to feed off the edge, probably to form up unbalanced edge, so that he can force white take the unbalanced edge and then maybe attack to the X square so that he himself can exchange for the edge as well. So over here, I believe both players might have played more or less perfect line to be able to end at this result. So over here, let's just click on the AI button just to see. So I think this is quite impressive by Daniel just to be able to play this move, given that he was probably potentially short of time. It can be quite easy to actually get this endgame wrong, especially when you're short of time. So you do have to count out the sequences and make sure that it works. So this would have been a +2, which he got it, and this would have been a draw. And this, if people you tend to panic a bit more and you go for the corner first, then you might actually lose the game from this position when you actually had a win. So yeah, interesting game to see. Let's take a look at a couple more games. So let's see what's interesting to see. So maybe Joanna against Murakami Takeshi, perhaps? So just looking at some comments here, hopefully the video doesn't look too much sideways for you guys. Because I was trying to change the orientation and I think YouTube Live for some reason didn't allow me to kind of change it. Hopefully it doesn't present itself as a portrait sideways video, I hope. Yeah. But yeah, maybe let me try to kind of get offline and then try to fix that orientation before coming on for the next couple of rounds. So yeah, if you're interested, please continue to follow this event on flipthedisc.com or liveothello.com. I'll just pause this live and then maybe try to fix the orientation for everyone.